Trump confronted by black woman veteran at live press conference. What he does next shocks everyone. We dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of February. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this dream too. The press room at the White House was buzzing with energy as journalists, political analysts, and reporters from all over the country settled into their seats. The room was a blend of flashing camera lights, hurried whispers, and the unmistakable tension that always accompanied a presidential press conference. At the podium, President Trump stood with his usual confident demeanor, scanning the room as his press secretary arranged the final details. The nation watched live, waiting for the next round of statements, questions, and inevitable controversies. Among the sea of reporters and political figures sat Sergeant Angela Williams, a decorated black veteran, whose expression was a mix of determination and controlled intensity. She wasn't just another journalist. She had a purpose, a mission. And today, she intended to confront the President of the United States. Angela had spent years serving her country, sacrificing time with her family, and enduring hardships that only those in uniform could understand. She had faced enemies abroad, but today, her battle was different. It wasn't on a foreign battlefield, but right here at home, against the very system that had once promised her opportunity and respect. The recent political climate had been turbulent, with policies affecting veterans in ways that had gone largely unnoticed. Budget cuts, healthcare failures, and public statements that undermined the service of soldiers like her had been piling up. Angela had watched as promises were made and broken, as fellow veterans struggled with homelessness and neglect. And now, as she adjusted the microphone in front of her, she knew this was her chance. This wasn't just about her. It was about every soldier who had given everything, only to feel abandoned. As the press conference commenced, reporters fired their usual questions, some about the economy, others about foreign policy, but Angela remained patient, waiting for the perfect moment. Trump answered questions with his signature bravado, dismissing criticism with casual retorts and humorous jabs. The audience reacted with a mix of laughter and tension. Then, the moment arrived. The press secretary pointed toward Angela. A flicker of recognition crossed Trump's face as he read her press credentials. She wasn't just any journalist. She was a veteran, a black woman, and most importantly, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge authority. "Go ahead," he said, leaning on the podium, his expression unreadable. Angela took a steady breath. "Mr. President," she began, her voice strong but controlled. "You have repeatedly claimed to support the troops, yet under your administration, we've seen a rise in homelessness among veterans, a lack of mental health services, and funding cuts to essential programs. You said you respect the military, but when a veteran like me, who has served on the front lines, watches her brothers and sisters in arms struggle while you hold rallies claiming everything is great, it feels like a betrayal. So tell me, Mr. President, how do you justify this contradiction?" A hush fell over the room. Every camera zoomed in, every eye locked onto the president. The confrontation had begun. For a moment, the room was silent. The air thickened with an intensity that no one had anticipated. Even the reporters, usually eager to interrupt or follow up with their own questions, remained still, their pens hovering above their notepads, waiting for the president's response. Trump shifted slightly at the podium, his expression a calculated mix of amusement and scrutiny. He was used to confrontations. Reporters, politicians, and activists often challenged him, but this was different. This wasn't a journalist pushing for a headline or a senator scoring political points. This was a veteran, a black woman, and she wasn't backing down. A smirk curled at the edge of Trump's lips, the kind he used when addressing a crowd of supporters at his rallies. "That's a very emotional question," he said, adjusting his stance. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, but there was a hint of unease in his posture. "I love the military. Nobody has done more for the veterans than I have. We've passed tremendous legislation, fantastic things, really, and we've helped thousands, maybe millions. But you can't believe everything you read in the fake news." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The predictable pivot, the classic deflection. Some reporters exchanged knowing glances, already preparing their headlines. Trump dodges veterans' question with usual rhetoric. But Angela was not here for a game of semantics. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto his. "With all due respect, Mr. President," she said, her voice unwavering, "this isn't about fake news. This is about facts. I've seen soldiers, men and women who put their lives on the line, sleeping under bridges, struggling to get medical care, and battling PTSD without support. When they reach out for help, they're met with bureaucracy, with excuses. And I want to know why. Why is it that billions go toward tax breaks for corporations, but veterans are left begging for scraps?" The tension in the room became suffocating. A cameraman repositioned, trying to capture every angle of the president's face. The press secretary shifted uncomfortably at the edge of the stage. Angela's words weren't just personal. They were an indictment of the very image Trump had built for himself. Trump exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping against the podium. "Look, I get it," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "You've served, and that's great. I respect that, I really do. But we've made incredible progress. Have you seen the VA reforms we've passed? Huge improvements. The best, really. And the economy? Under my leadership, jobs are booming. Veterans are getting hired at record rates. You're talking about problems from before I took office. That's on the previous administrations." His words were confident, even rehearsed, but they didn't land the way they usually did. The crowd wasn't nodding in agreement. There were no cheers, no affirmations. Angela had struck a nerve, and everyone could see it. Angela didn't blink. She had faced war zones, she had stared down enemies, and she had survived battles that most people couldn't imagine. She wasn't about to let a political maneuver shake her resolve. She straightened her posture, her military training kicking in. "I didn't ask about past administrations, sir," she said. "I asked about now. I asked about the reality our veterans are facing under your leadership. And I'll ask again, what are you going to do about it?" The words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the marble walls and piercing through the facade of rehearsed answers. The cameras rolled. The world watched. And for the first time in a long time, Donald Trump didn't have a quick response. The weight of Angela's question hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. The silence stretched longer than anyone had expected. Trump, usually quick with a comeback or a dismissive remark, seemed to measure his words more carefully this time. His usual bravado flickered for a split second, as if something about Angela's unwavering gaze forced him to reconsider the path he had intended to take. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every subtle shift in his expression. The journalists exchanged glances, sensing the moment was bigger than just another heated exchange. For the first time in a long time, the president appeared uncertain. Then, in an unexpected move, Trump took a step back from the podium. He let out a breath and folded his hands on the stand. "You know," he began, his voice quieter than before, "I've spoken to a lot of veterans. A lot of great men and women who have served this country. Some of them come to my rallies. They shake my hand. They tell me their stories. And I hear you. I do." His tone wasn't the usual bombastic sales pitch, nor was it a calculated deflection. It was something different, something almost human. The shift in energy was palpable. The room, which had been brimming with tension just moments ago, softened into something else: curiosity. Even Angela, who had prepared for dismissal or verbal combat, found herself caught off guard. Was this sincerity? The president continued. "I know there are problems. I know some of these men and women are suffering. And yeah, we've done a lot, more than people give us credit for. But maybe," he paused, his fingers tapping against the podium before tightening into a fist, "maybe we haven't done enough. Maybe it's not about what we passed in Congress or what numbers we put on a chart. Maybe it's about listening. Actually listening." The murmurs in the press pool grew louder. Some reporters were frantically typing, others whispering into their phones. This wasn't the Trump they expected. This wasn't the script. Angela narrowed her eyes slightly. "Then listen to me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to argue policies. I'm here because my brothers and sisters are out there suffering. And no speech, no press conference statistic is going to change that. What will?" The room held its breath. Trump looked at her, really looked at her, as if for the first time he saw more than just a challenge to his authority. He saw a soldier, A woman who had fought for this country. A veteran who refused to be ignored. He straightened his tie, exhaled sharply, then did something that no one in the room, perhaps not even himself, had expected. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a notepad, and wrote something down. "I want to talk to you after this," he said, tearing the page off and handing it to his press secretary. "Set it up. I want to hear exactly what she has to say." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even his own staff looked momentarily frozen. This wasn't damage control. This wasn't a media stunt. It was something else. Something real. Angela stared at him, unsure whether to believe what she had just witnessed. But in that moment, she knew one thing. She had just changed the conversation. The press conference ended in a flurry of whispers, flashing cameras, and frantic analysts trying to decipher what had just happened. No one expected Trump to react the way he did. Some called it a calculated move. Others speculated it was an attempt to control the narrative. But Angela didn't care about the theories. All she cared about was what came next. As reporters shouted questions and the press secretary scrambled to move things along, an aide approached her, eyes cautious, posture stiff. "Ms. Williams," he said, barely concealing his discomfort, "the president would like to meet with you privately in the Roosevelt Room." Angela nodded, her expression unreadable. She had gotten what she wanted, but now she had to decide what to do with it. As she walked through the grand corridors of the White House, her military instincts kicked in. Every hallway, every doorway, every staff member she passed, she took it all in. She wasn't intimidated, but she was prepared. She had met leaders before, generals who commanded entire armies, diplomats who shaped global policies. But none of them had ever made her feel the weight of history pressing down the way this moment did. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every veteran who had been ignored, every soldier who had come home broken, only to be forgotten. The door to the Roosevelt Room opened, and she stepped inside. Trump was already seated at the long wooden table, his arms crossed, his signature red tie slightly loosened. The press secretary and a few aides stood along the perimeter, their expressions carefully neutral. Angela didn't wait for an invitation. She walked straight to the chair across from him and sat down. For a brief moment, the room was silent. Then, Trump leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "All right," he said, his voice lower than before. "You have my attention. Now tell me, what do you want?" Angela met his gaze without hesitation. "I want more than just words," she said. "I want action. I want accountability. And I want a commitment that isn't just about headlines." The president smirked, shaking his head slightly. "You don't waste time, do you?" Angela's jaw tightened. "I don't have time to waste." Trump studied her for a moment, then exhaled, rubbing his chin. "Look, I know the VA system is broken. I know veterans are struggling. And yeah, I know I've made statements that haven't exactly been well received. But the truth is, I don't sit in every policy meeting. I don't see what's happening on the ground. So tell me, what's the reality?" Angela's heart pounded. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She leaned in, her voice unwavering. "The reality, Mr. President, is that thousands of veterans, your veterans, are suffering. Homelessness, mental health crises, inadequate health care. And every time they ask for help, they get pushed into an endless loop of bureaucracy. You say you want to support the troops? Prove it. Reform the system, make it accessible, make it real. Cut through the red tape and actually put veterans first. Not in speeches, but in action." The room was dead silent. Even the aides seemed to hold their breath. Trump tapped his fingers on the table, then gave a small nod. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we can do." Angela didn't smile. She didn't relax. She knew words were easy. Promises were easy. But as she looked into the president's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected, a flicker of realization, a shift, a crack in the performance. And for the first time, she wondered, had she actually made an impact? Angela sat upright, her fingers interlocked as she waited for Trump's response. The room remained eerily silent, the tension so thick it felt like an unspoken battle was already taking place. Across from her, Trump leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping idly against the polished surface of the Roosevelt Room's table. His aides stood rigid along the walls, their faces unreadable, but Angela could feel it, The quiet resistance, the doubt, the unseen barriers that had always kept promises from becoming reality. Trump had made an unprecedented move by inviting her into this conversation. But talk wasn't enough. Angela needed action. Trump exhaled, rubbing his temple before finally speaking. All right, let's assume you're right. Things aren't where they should be. What do you propose? I don't want speeches, I want solutions. Angela didn't hesitate. I want an emergency task force created within the next 48 hours to assess the failures of the VA system and provide direct assistance to homeless veterans. Not a study, not a report, real field work. She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. And I want you to publicly commit to meeting with veteran advocacy groups. Not in a month, not after midterms, now. The moment she finished, an uneasy stir rippled through the aides. One of them, a middle-aged man in a gray suit with a clipped earpiece, cleared his throat pointedly. Mr. President, he interjected, his voice controlled but firm. With all due respect, this would require significant resources and could complicate existing policy negotiations. Trump turned his head toward the man, his expression unreadable. And the aide hesitated, choosing his words carefully. And it could be perceived as a reactive decision rather than a strategic one. We have a re-election campaign to consider. Angela's jaw tightened. There was the real obstacle. Politics, optics, image over substance. She turned back to Trump. Is this about veterans or votes? The words landed like a slap. Trump's lips pressed into a thin line. For all his bravado, he didn't like being called out. His knee bounced slightly under the table, his tell when he was thinking. The aides exchanged nervous glances, but Angela held her ground. You say you want solutions? Then stop considering them and start implementing them. The room tensed, waiting for Trump's response. Would he back down? Would he dismiss her? Then, in a move that caught even his own team off guard, he reached for a notepad and scrawled something down. Fine, he said, tearing the sheet off and handing it to his press secretary. Set up the task force. I want reports on my desk by the end of the week. The aides looked as if the air had been knocked out of them. One of them opened his mouth as if to protest, but Trump silenced him with a single raised hand. And get the press ready, he added. I'm making a statement on this. Angela didn't smile, didn't relax. She had won this round, but she knew battles weren't won in single victories. As she stood up to leave, she met Trump's gaze one last time. There was something different there. Not just calculation, not just politics, something deeper. Had she just forced the most powerful man in the world to actually listen? The next morning, the White House press room was packed to capacity. Reporters jostled for space. Photographers adjusted their lenses, and television crews prepared for a moment that had already begun to dominate the national conversation. The unexpected confrontation between President Trump and Sergeant Angela Williams had gone viral overnight, triggering heated debates across news networks and social media platforms. Was this a turning point? A political stunt? Or something else entirely? Angela stood in the wings, watching as Trump adjusted his tie before stepping onto the stage. His usual air of confidence was there, but there was something else in his demeanor, a way to shift. The room quieted as he approached the podium, the cameras locking onto his face. Good morning, he began, his voice steady but firm. Yesterday, during my press conference, I was confronted by a veteran, a decorated soldier who has served this country with honor and courage. She spoke about the challenges that many veterans face, challenges that, frankly, have not been addressed the way they should be. He paused, scanning the crowd. And I listened. A wave of murmurs spread through the reporters. Trump admitting to listening? That was not something they had expected. He continued, I have directed my administration to form an emergency task force to address the failures within the VA system, particularly concerning homelessness and access to mental health care. We will take immediate steps to cut through the red tape and deliver real results for our veterans. There was no showmanship in his voice, no off-the-cuff remarks meant to rile up a crowd. It was measured, direct, serious. Angela watched, her arms crossed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then it did, and I've asked Sergeant Angela Williams to be part of that process. The words sent a shockwave through the room. Reporters erupted with questions. their voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. Angela's breath hitched, but she remained outwardly composed. This hadn't been part of the plan. Trump turned slightly toward where she stood, signaling for her to step forward. For a split second, she considered refusing, considered walking away before she became part of a political game. But then she thought about the veterans who had been waiting for anyone, to force change. So she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The room exploded with flashes of cameras and a barrage of questions. Sergeant Williams, do you trust the administration to follow through? President Trump, is this a genuine commitment or a PR move? What specific changes will be implemented first? Angela held up a hand, her voice cutting through the noise. This isn't about politics. It's about responsibility. And I intend to make sure this administration keeps its word. Trump gave a small nod, but his expression was unreadable. Angela knew better than to assume victory. She had won a battle, not the war. And as she looked out at the sea of journalists, she realized something else. All eyes were on her now. Hours after the press conference, Angela found herself sitting inside the West Wing of the White House, across from a panel of advisors, policymakers, and military officials. The Roosevelt Room, once an intimidating symbol of untouchable authority, now felt like a battlefield where the real fight was about to begin. The air was thick with tension as high-ranking officials exchanged glances, their faces unreadable, but their reluctance palpable. Trump had made an announcement to the world, but now Angela would find out if his words truly carried weight behind the scenes. Sitting at the head of the table, Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "All right," he said, his tone casual but firm. "We got the cameras off. No press, no Twitter, no speeches. Just us. What do we do first?" His words seemed like an invitation for action, but Angela noticed something: the body language of those around him. The advisors weren't eager. Some scribbled in their notepads. Others folded their arms, exchanging wary glances. Finally, one of them spoke. "Mr. President, while we all acknowledge the importance of supporting veterans, we have to be realistic about implementation," said a man in a gray suit, his voice careful, calculated. "Fast-tracking programs on this scale requires funding, and funding requires congressional approval. This isn't something that can happen overnight." Angela's eyes narrowed. She had seen this game before. Delay, debate, bury the issue in bureaucracy until the public forgets. She wasn't about to let that happen. "We don't need congressional approval to start sending mobile health units to high-risk areas," she interjected, "or to prioritize emergency housing initiatives for veterans who are sleeping on the streets. Those decisions can be made today, if the will exists." Her words cut through the room like a blade. Some of the officials looked surprised by her directness, others annoyed. Trump tapped his fingers on the table, eyeing his team. "She's right," he finally said. "We can move on some of this now." The room tensed. Angela knew that while Trump might have the power to force action, his advisors were the real gatekeepers. She watched as one of the policy directors, a sharp-faced woman in a navy blazer, spoke up. "Even if we mobilize resources immediately, the political pushback will be significant," she said. "Some key donors have interests in keeping veteran funding within privatized contracts. Shifting resources away from those could create friction." Angela exhaled sharply, resisting the urge to scoff. So that was it? Money, influence, the usual excuses. She turned to Trump, eyes unwavering. "You asked what we do first? Here's my answer. We stop making decisions based on what's easiest or most convenient. If this administration really wants to make a difference, it starts by choosing action over politics." The room fell into silence again. Trump studied her for a moment, then turned to his team. "Figure it out," he said, his voice laced with finality. "And don't come back with a list of problems. Bring me a plan." Angela knew this was just the beginning. Winning the public moment was one thing. Winning the fight behind closed doors would be another battle entirely. The first wave of backlash came faster than Angela had anticipated. Within 24 hours of the press conference, conservative pundits on television and online began attacking her credibility. Some dismissed her as an activist in uniform. Others accused her of disrespecting the commander-in-chief by publicly challenging him. Far-right commentators spun conspiracy theories, questioning whether she had been planted by political opponents to embarrass the administration. Angela had expected criticism, but the sheer scale of the attacks, the coordinated smearing, caught her off guard. Sitting in her hotel room in D.C., she scrolled through social media, seeing her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Headlines flashed across the screen. Radical veteran clashes with Trump. Who really runs the show? Angela Williams. Hero or political pawn? Is this the military's version of woke politics? She clenched her jaw. They were trying to turn this into a circus, to drown out the real issue with noise, to frame her as the enemy instead of someone fighting for veterans. She tossed her phone aside and exhaled. She had survived combat, stared down real threats. She wasn't about to break under the weight of bad faith attacks. But as she looked at the screen again, she saw something that made her pause. A direct tweet from President Trump himself. Sergeant Angela Williams is a strong, tough veteran who cares about our troops. I don't always agree with her, but I respect her. Let's work together and get this done. Angela blinked. This wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't an attack. It was an unexpected olive branch. The media was looking for division, for war between her and the president, but Trump had just shifted the narrative. She knew this was strategic, that he played the media game better than anyone. But she also knew one thing for sure. This meant he wasn't backing down from the promise he made in that room. Just as she processed this, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she answered anyway. Angela Williams. A deep, measured voice came through the line. Sergeant Williams, we need to talk. Now. The tone made her sit up straight. This wasn't a journalist or a political advisor. This was someone on the inside. And from the sound of it, she was about to learn just how deep the resistance to real change really went. Angela gripped the phone tighter, her heart pounding just enough for her military instincts to kick in. Who is this? She asked, her voice steady but sharp. There was a brief pause on the other end before the voice spoke again, low and deliberate. Let's just say I'm someone who's been in rooms you haven't. And I'm calling because you need to understand something. You're stepping on toes that don't like to be stepped on. Angela's mind raced. She had dealt with bureaucratic pushback before, had seen politicians stall and resist change, but this was different. There was an edge to this voice, controlled, calculated, but carrying an unmistakable warning. She took a breath. If this is a threat, you'll have to be more specific, she said, forcing a slight smirk into her voice. Because I don't scare easily. A dry chuckle came through the receiver. I'm not threatening you, Sergeant. I'm informing you. What you're pushing for. It's not just about money or politics. There are people, powerful people, who have built entire industries off veterans staying exactly where they are. Contracts worth billions. Government ties that run deeper than you think. You come in demanding real change, and that makes you a problem. Angela felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. She had suspected there were deeper forces at play, but hearing it confirmed by an insider made her stomach churn. She pushed forward. Then let's cut to the chase. What exactly do these powerful people plan to do about me? The line was quiet for a moment. Then the voice dropped to a whisper. They'll do what they always do. Discredit you. Undermine you. If that doesn't work, they'll make you regret ever stepping into that room with him. A cold chill ran down Angela's spine, but she didn't flinch. Good luck with that, she said, her voice unwavering. I didn't sign up to play it safe. A deep sigh echoed through the receiver. Then watch your back, Sergeant. You just put yourself on the wrong list. The line clicked. Dead. Angela lowered the phone slowly, her fingers curling into a fist. She had expected resistance. But now she knew this wasn't just political. It was personal, and the battle had only just begun. The next morning, Angela woke up to a storm, not of bullets or bombs, but of headlines and political warfare. Her phone was flooded with messages. Some were from fellow veterans offering support. Others were concerned calls from people she hadn't heard from in years. But the loudest voices came from the media. She turned on the television, and there it was. New leaks questioned Angela Williams' military record. Who is Sergeant Williams? A patriot or a political pawn? Veteran or opportunist? The truth about the woman taking on Trump. Angela sat on the edge of her bed, exhaling sharply. They weren't wasting any time. The smear campaign had begun. Cable news was flooded with so-called experts, dissecting her career, twisting details, making accusations out of thin air. One commentator claimed there were discrepancies in her service record. Another suggested she had only confronted Trump for personal gain. Even past interviews were being pulled apart, her words taken out of context to make it seem like she had a hidden agenda. They were doing exactly what the voice on the phone had warned. They were trying to destroy her before she could do real damage. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Welcome to the game. Let's see how long you last." Angela clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of everything pressing in. She had survived war zones, led teams under fire, but this battlefield was different. Here, enemies didn't fight in the open. They fought in the shadows, using power, influence, and the media to break people down. And they were betting she would fold, but they had underestimated her. With a deep breath, she stood up and grabbed her laptop. If they wanted to fight, they were going to get one. She wasn't just going to respond. She was going to expose them. An hour later, her Twitter feed lit up with a post that sent shockwaves through the media. "I see the lies. I see the attacks. But you can't rewrite my service, and you can't erase the truth. If this is the game you want to play, then let's play. I won't be the one backing down." The post went viral within minutes. Hashtags like hashtag I stand with Angela and hashtag veterans deserve better began trending. Support flooded in from soldiers, activists, and even political figures who saw what was happening. The attacks weren't just about her anymore. They were about silencing veterans who dared to demand more. Then, just as she was about to log off, she received a private message. A name she hadn't expected. Donald Trump. The message was brief. "We need to talk. Call me now." Angela stared at the screen. This fight was far from over. And now, the president himself wanted back in the conversation. Angela paced in her hotel room, phone in hand, her thoughts racing. Trump wanted to talk. Was it damage control? A strategic move? Or something more? She knew one thing. She wasn't about to be silenced, no matter the pressure. With a steady breath, she hit the call button. The line rang once before his voice came through, direct as ever. "Sergeant Williams," Trump said, his tone somewhere between curiosity and irritation. "You've certainly stirred things up." Angela didn't flinch. "So have you?" A low chuckle. "Yeah, well, that's what I do. But this..." He paused. "This isn't just me anymore. You're making powerful people very nervous." Angela's grip on the phone tightened. "Good." A beat of silence. Then his voice dropped, more serious than she had ever heard before. "Look, I'm not your enemy. I know you think I'm just another politician, but I don't play by their rules. And the truth is, the people behind this, they don't care about me. They don't care about you. And they sure as hell don't care about veterans." Angela sat down, her heartbeat steady but alert. "Then why are you calling me?" Another pause. Then, in a tone that surprised her, he said, "Because I want to see how far you're willing to go." Angela exhaled. "As far as it takes." A sharp breath from the other end. "Then meet me tomorrow. Oval Office. No cameras. No press. Just you and me." Angela didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." Angela stepped into the most powerful room in the world and found Trump standing by his desk, flipping through a folder. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, something in his eyes told her that, for once, he wasn't performing. He motioned to the chair across from him. "Sit." She did. He slid the folder toward her. "Read that." Angela opened it. Inside were classified reports, budget breakdowns, internal memos from military contractors, and shocking statistics on veteran neglect. Some of it she expected, but other parts? They made her stomach turn. "This isn't just incompetence," she murmured. "It's intentional." Trump nodded. "Welcome to Washington." Angela looked up. "Why show me this?" "Because," he said, leaning back, "if we do this, if we really push for change, they'll come for you. Harder than they already are. And I need to know, are you ready for that?" Angela closed the folder and met his gaze. "I fought for this country. I won't stop fighting now." A smirk, just barely. Then, for the first time since this all began, Trump extended his hand. "Then let's make history." Angela shook it. She knew the battle was only beginning. But now, she wasn't fighting alone. The world watched. The press exploded with speculation. Political analysts debated the meaning of their meeting, and social media was on fire. Had Trump really teamed up with a black woman veteran who had publicly challenged him? The unexpected alliance sent shockwaves through Washington. Within a week, the White House announced an unprecedented initiative, the Veterans Accountability Act, designed to eliminate bureaucratic barriers, increase funding for mental health services, and launch immediate emergency housing programs for homeless veterans. The initiative bypassed traditional slow-moving committees, cutting straight to executive action. The media was in chaos. Trump's usual allies were divided. Some praised him for delivering for the troops, while others accused him of caving to activist pressure. On the left, reactions were equally mixed. Some hailed Angela as a hero who forced change, while others warned her against being used as a political pawn. Angela didn't care about the noise. She cared about results. But Washington didn't take change lightly. Just days after the initiative was announced, Angela's personal records were mysteriously leaked. Fabricated stories about her disciplinary actions in the military appeared on obscure blogs, which were then picked up by major networks. A fake scandal about her finances spread like wildfire. Then, she received another phone call. This time, she recognized the voice. The same one that had warned her before. You should have backed down when you had the chance. Angela's pulse remained steady. She had expected this. Do your worst, she said, her voice like steel. I'm not going anywhere. A week later, Angela stood behind Trump at the White House Rose Garden as he signed the first phase of the Veterans Accountability Act into law. Reporters shouted questions at her, some accusing her of selling out, others demanding to know if this was all a political stunt. When Trump finished signing, he handed her the pen. She took it, but then instead of walking away, she stepped to the podium. Unscripted, unplanned, raw. She looked straight at the cameras. This fight was never about me. It was never about politics. It was about the men and women who gave everything for this country, only to be forgotten when they came home. If standing here today means change for them, then let the world say whatever it wants about me. I don't care, because this is just the beginning. The world was watching. And for the first time in history, a black woman veteran had forced the most powerful government in the world to listen. Months later, the results of their battle began to show. Veterans were getting real help, not just empty promises. The attacks on Angela continued, but she never backed down. She became a national symbol of veteran advocacy. As for Trump, he remained Trump. Some days he praised her. Other days he took credit for everything. But Angela didn't care. She hadn't done this for politics. She had done it for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And in the end, that was all that mattered. If you made it this far, comment where you're watching from and let us know if the story of justice moved you.